At what age do you want to be married? Do you put yourself in a...
So this is a very good point. I hope that Anton differentiates between the male and the female, for we are significantly different, namely based on our biology, and the necessity of the woman to marry and procreate at an earlier age is quite strong. And I've even had women that I have been involved with, because they struggle with the truth, they've created lies to make themselves feel better. I had one young lady, it's a true story, and it really saddens me. It turned out that she was a bit unruly and she wanted children before I wanted children. We were similar in age, which is why she needed them. She's starting to expire as a woman, and me, I'm entering the prime as a man. And when I, set her aside and started dealing with other women, which I always was, but, at a greater level, of course, younger women, she says, oh, I know you're planning to have multiple wives, and if you have two wives and you're going to get both of them pregnant, they might not get pregnant at the same time. And then one of them is going to be jealous and it's going to cause problems in your household. And I didn't respond to this because this was a silly lie. And frankly, it doesn't matter because she's the past. I need to engage this conversation. But she was suggesting that the women wouldn't get pregnant around the same time, which is in fact my goal, to get them pregnant around the same time, to create efficiency and ease in raising the children when they're around the same age, makes it easier to do things. So in my head, I was thinking, no, that's not true. A woman who is young and healthy is fertile, and they will get pregnant fairly quickly with exceptional levels of ease. I know this for a fact, and I have some evidence base for this. But she was lying, trying to liken these young women to her, a woman who's advanced in age, who would basically be a geriatric pregnancy. And for her, it would take her a while to get pregnant. She would have to try to get pregnant. Anytime you hear this concept of we're trying to get pregnant, look at the woman. It's always the woman is older. That's why they're trying. And in a couple instances, maybe the guy has issues. He's shooting blanks. But in my case, I got the super sperm. Carrying on.
A position to find the person that's best for you. Has your father given you away? Does your parents actually see value in the person that is looking to marry you? And when you start to ask yourself these questions, and I don't speak to just rich people because we both have money, we both have resources. So let's remove that from the table. I speak to the majority, not the minority. And when you are 20, 21, 22 years old, especially if you are a person that's looking to become a man, you are supposed to fail in controlled environments, meaning that your father is not even supposed to give you everything. He's supposed to give you what you need in order to be successful. My father was able to buy me a car, but he told me that I had to earn it and work for it because I valued it more, which then extended to every single thing that I touch, including the woman. See, my wife is here.
So right now, Anton seems like he's talking some sense, and I assume that this is going to go somewhere. I'd love to see this just a touch sharper, but I'm interested with where he's going. I also like that he made a meaningful real life reference point saying my wife is here. And similar to the other fella, he's giving personal anecdotes which in a debate probably best to stay away from. But in either case, he'll obliterate this guy. There's no doubt that Anton is of superior intelligence and articulation.
My wife travels with me. She knows me. She understands me, right? And so at 20, 21, 22 years old, you supposed to be broke unless you're doing something that you ain't supposed to do in order to get.
I wouldn't say you're supposed to be broke. That's just not quite right. But I would state that it's likely that you will not be financially set, especially if you're going through the public school system or you have average parents. However, I do believe that with the way the Sasson will teach our young people and engage them in practical education and teaching entrepreneurship at a young age, by the time they're 18, they will have tried 9 or 10 businesses, understood the full cycle of product-based business, and they probably, a couple of them will have won by then. So I anticipate by 18, 19, 20, some of them will have thriving businesses. And that's because the education will be circled around, of course, competence in arithmetic, chemistry, software, various types of engineering, but products and entrepreneurship and making a buck, that's going to be core to the education. Many things will have a much less of a focus, things like social studies and, all this nonsense that is really a waste. You can read up on that in your spare time.
Get it? You're supposed to be building. You're supposed to be understanding each other. It's a storming, a norming, a forming situation. And in no circumstance do you ever come into it fully understanding who the person is, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. And so when we start to look at what God has ordained to be great, the purpose of a man.
So this is where I part with what Anton is saying, because we can all, if we want to hear what God says, we can open up our own Bible. If we want to hear what God says, we can walk into a masjid, a temple, a church, a mosque, you name it. And so I don't think that the internet is a place where we need to see more preachers. You know, in the South, you can walk through Texas and Georgia, find preachers everywhere, churches in abundance. And we've seen American culture still decline with churches everywhere. A Bible that shuns gluttony. We see a bunch of fat Christians. A Bible that admonishes you not to engage in sexual deviance. We see the rainbow flag on the church. We don't need more Christianity, more God, more religion. Frankly, it's not worked. Just frankly, it's not worked. And increasingly, we find that churches, in an effort to increase revenue, they become all accepting under the lie that Jesus accepted everything. And because Jesus accepts everything, we get to increase our following and thereby increase the dollars that go into the collection plate. This is a hard thing for people to hear, especially when they believe themselves to be devout Christians, even though most of them are not. They hate to hear that, you know, Christianity is not quite working. It's just the truth of the matter. I mean, look at your schools, look at what they teach your children. And we claim that this is a Christian nation. We even see on our money, it says, "In God we trust." And just earlier today, there were some gentlemen here at the property, you know, doing some cleaning and some working on some of the electrical things and just a couple of things on this piece of real estate. Intelligent, experienced, wealthy men, developers. We're having a conversation on American history and politics, and they're both, you know, very devout Christians and older than I am significantly. And I was asking them this question. I said, hey, I identify when America stopped being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant government that was looking out for a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant population, which is to say honorable white Christians looking out for themselves as the citizens. Now, the reason I make that designation is because there's always the in group and the out group. And historically, you know, or we have to acknowledge that America is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. It was founded by them. You'll hear people lie and say, like, blacks built America. Well, if you mean literally, yes, they were the labor, but they were not the brains. They were not the organizers. They were not the founding fathers. They were the labor. And generally, labor does not get well compensated or respected. So the leadership class in America were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So it's understandable that they did the Native Americans dirty, because you're not a part of the nation. You're outside the nation. That's why they were victim of genocide. It's sensible that they did the Black Americans, those who would come to be known as the Black Americans, did them dirty because they were not included in the definition of citizen, nor were they a part of the ethno state that was being erected. So I said, I get it that you do the blacks dirty and you do the natives dirty, but at what point did the American government of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christians decide to do their own people dirty? At what point did the white Anglo-Saxon Christians in the government decide that they don't even care about the white Anglo-Saxon Christians who are the citizens? You see, when you had a situation like prohibition, that was an attempt of the government to say, we don't care about the tax dollar. We don't care about, you know, the parties and all that. We're a Christian nation. We want people to be free of intoxicants. We know that it is bad, and we're going to protect you from yourselves and your own sin and your own low nature. So we prohibit alcohol. Then there came a point where the American population was wicked enough that there was so much bootlegging and so much consumption of this illegal substance that it was hard and nearly impossible to police. And even the American establishment, as embodied by the Kennedy family, John F. Kennedy's father was a famous bootlegger who became wealthy off of crime, like Al Capone, but he's not viewed as a gangster somehow. And then you have the government that decides to repeal prohibition, which is basically to say it's okay now. We're going to tax it. We're going to make money from it. And we're going to let you guys be drunk and ruin yourselves. So that's where I say, okay, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian no longer cared about the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant citizen, which is to say that the nation was no longer ruled by God and goodness. And even the whites would sell out each other for money, for profit, for a cheap thrill. And I was asking him what he thought. And so this older white gentleman who's very well-to-do, he said, you know what, I think it was the way the U.S. government responded to the Great Depression. Now, mind you, this is a conversation among a couple of men who are well off. And so you just have to acknowledge that. And I say that to temper your reaction to this. He says, well, you know, when the Great Depression occurred, what they did was they gave handouts to try to, you know, get the country past it. And it took 6 years. He says, I believe if they didn't give handouts and just basically let the cyclical nature of the capitalist economy take its course with no handouts, we would not have created the welfare state that we see today, which has basically ruined all of the peoples of America. And I thought that was quite an interesting take. And it was much less decision based, like my view. His was more so looking at reactions, whereas mine was more so looking at an effort to make revenue on the part of the government. His was more so looking at an inadequate reaction to a challenge. I thought they were both interesting, but they're both during the relatively similar time period. And also, if you look at the time he identified around the time of the Great Depression and the way the government reacted with handouts, that's around the time, I believe, someone correct me if I'm wrong, that you also had women's suffrage and various other things which were clearly detrimental to the society. I just want to add that meaningful context and like give you guys something to think about as we talk through, you know, how society has devolved, how women have gotten out of the kitchen, how men have gotten out of the position of being able to be a provider. Now, only really wealthy men can be a provider without the woman working. It's not practical to tell an average Joe to make $300K in cash and for his old lady not have to work at all. That's not reasonable in America, which is a wealthy country. Just imagine trying to do this in the third world. This guy's completely impractical, the guy in the suit. He's a fool.